Today on Commander Replay, Etali Primal Storm joins forces with 4 ordinary teenagers. Can Etali defeat Genghis Rex and the evil Tyrannos? Find out next on Commander Replay. Alright, welcome back everyone, playing some Etali Primal Storm. This hand looks okay. It's a little bit slow, no mana rocks. Do have a lot of lands. Lands are good for this deck. This deck is a very high curve, so we'll go ahead and keep. Hopefully we can draw into something that'll speed us up a little bit. You guys are gonna have to bear with me. I've been sick for about 10 days now, and my voice is still pretty wrecked. So I'm definitely gonna be stuffy and hoarse and all of that kind of stuff. But I did want to get some filming done, so like I said, you guys will just have to bear with me. So, back to our turn, we draw another land. I could have did without that, honestly. We'll lay down the Spine Rock Null. Good stuff under the Spine Rock Null. I think I'm going to put the World at War under there because the Kozilek we can tutor with Eye of Ugin and things like that. So I want to leave that available to us. If we get 7 damage in, we're probably doing it during combat, so having that World at War, I think work out really well if we can get that going. So turn 1, our opponents just lay down some lands. Nothing much going on there. Back to our turn. We draw into another land. Not great. But we'll lay down the Mad Blind Mountain and pass the turn. The Mad Blind Mountain is a pet card of mine. There is no real reason for it. Every once in a long while, like if you have a Divining Top or something like that, you can look at the top of your library and realize that nothing's coming and you may need to shuffle. But this land is probably better served by a basic mountain since the Mad Blind Mountain comes in tapped. But it's just a pet card of mine that I've been wanting to mess around with for a while. So that's a thing. That's the old art. I dig it. Rakdos Signet for the Mathis opponent. Ooh, no. Another land. Unfortunately, we don't have the 2 red permanents for this Mad Blind Mountain, otherwise I would shuffle our library. There are 40 lands in this deck, so we will expect to draw a lot of them, but yeah, we could definitely use a little bit of action right now. Luckily, none of our opponents laid down Sol Ring or Mana Crypt or anything like that, so they're still playing a fair game of Magic. That'll give us a chance to climb into the game a little bit. Sultai Ascendancy for the Mimeoplasm. And Riku drops another land and passes. That's an Oblivion Stone for the Mathis. There's not really too much on board yet that's scary, but a card like that will tend to slow the game down since no one wants to commit anything into the Oblivion Stone. We draw a Reverberate. That's good. That'll give us something. If one of the green players can lay down a Cultivate or some card draw or something like that, that Reverberate should come in handy for us. And we can potentially Increasing Vengeance the Reverberate, which is a thing that we may do. Hopefully one of our opponents casts a decent spell for us to target with the Reverberate. This deck list was pretty tight on slots. Running 40 lands and some pretty high curve creatures really eats up a lot of the space in the deck. And I wasn't so sure about things like Reverberate and Increasing Vengeance because they're not going to be great off of the top with Etali's ability, but they're good if you have some open mana and you're attacking with Etali and you can cast the spells and then decide if it's something you want to copy or not. Baleful Strix coming down for... They're going to get to draw a card. Rashmi Eternity's Crafter coming down for the Riku opponent. Mathis Fiendseeker coming into play. And a Curse of Stalked Prey. So, looks like Mathis is on the Mathis Curse plans. It looks like he's putting it on the Riku opponent. Unfortunately, no spells in that turn cycle that we could copy with the Reverberate, so that's unfortunate. And we draw a Scourge of Kher Ridges. It's a card I really like, but it is expensive to use. But once you get it into play with some untapped lands, it has the ability to just completely control the board, which is something that I like. Still not much we can do. We're on 5 lands, can't cast our commander yet, so we're just going to leave up the Reverberate. So opponent is going to copy the Mathis with the Right of Replication, just so that we can get something going on board. We're going to copy the Right of Replication with the Reverberate. We're going to choose the Baleful Strix so we can get some card draw going. And then we're going to Increasing Vengeance the Right of Replication. And choosing the Baleful Strix again. So this will give us some blockers and it'll draw some cards, essentially cycling our copy spells. Although we can still cast Increasing Vengeance out of the graveyard later in the game, which may be helpful to us. But I think we really need this card draw right now. We just need to get some kind of action going because we've had a lot of nothing happening up to this point. First card draw is Eye of Ugin. That'll be helpful with a lot of lands. There's an Aggravated Assault. That's a card. So we finally got a little something going on. We also got some blockers. I like that. That seemed like a pretty good deal for us. And now there's multiple Mathises on board. It's going to be a lot of bounty counters ending up on things and a lot of people drawing cards when creatures die, so that'll be interesting. Mirror Gallery for the Riku opponent. The legend rule does not apply. That's funny. Do some crazy things with that card. Assumingly Riku probably has some clone effects and a bunch of legendary creatures in their deck. Shriekmaw coming into play for our opponent. Looks like only one legal target in Rashmi Eternity's Crafter, but a reasonable target at that.
Dinosaur Intelligence. Stegosaurus, Ankylosaurus, and Brachiosaurus, as well as other sauropods, are considered to be some of the dumbest animals that have ever lived based on their abysmally low brain-to-body weight ratio. Scientists have joked that these animals are essentially just walking stomachs.
So opponents were squabbling over the putting a bounty counter on Mathis Fiendseeker. It's unlikely that opponent would choose to send Mathis to the graveyard. They'll probably just send it back to the command zone, which means that it won't be dying and that the die trigger won't actually happen. Just explain to the Mimeoplasm opponent that whenever a creature goes back to the command zone, it doesn't trigger a dies effect. It's a pretty common mistake and misplay that a lot of people make. Even during a game, I find myself, like, if I was expecting a certain number of things to happen based on creatures dying, you forget that the commander doesn't actually count towards whatever die trigger is happening. Anyway, back to our turn. We draw a Steel Hellkite. We can find some things to do with that later on. But the name of the game is Etali Primal Storm, so we're gonna drop the land and cast our Etali. And then we're going to attack into the Riku opponent just because of the curse. It's going to make our creatures bigger, which I kind of like. Mathis laying down some curses, by the way. Played a Curse of Exhaustion on his turn, which is a card that I really like. Enchanted player can't cast more than one spell each turn, which is sort of like Rule of Law, except it only affects the targeted player. Something I mess around with a little bit in 1 vs. 1. It tends to not be great, but it can stop some like spell-based decks from really going crazy. Our Baleful Strix get a little bit bigger off of the Curse of Stalked Prey. Copy Enchantment coming down for the Mimeoplasm opponent. Gonna copy the Curse of Exhaustion and put it back. See who he's putting it on. Oh, he puts it on Mart. That is going to limit what we can cast with Etali, because the cards you exile with Etali are actually cast, so that's going to be kind of a pain in the butt. We will want to find a way to get rid of that as soon as possible. So many bounty counters ending up on many creatures. We do not have many ways to get rid of enchantments. Steel Hellkite is one of them, so if we can find something that'll give our Steel Hellkite haste, well, we're still a bunch of mana short to be able to do all of that, but eventually we will need to get rid of this Curse of Exhaustion. That's a Thada Adele coming into play. Riku opponent doesn't seem to have red mana. That's a big problem. Usually I do this earlier in the game, but here we are. So today we're playing Etali Primal Storm is 4 red for a 6/6. Whenever it attacks, exile the top card of each player's library, then you may cast any number of non-land cards exiled this way without paying their mana costs. Obviously really powerful in a 4-player game of Commander. You have up to 4 cards that you can cast off the top of people's libraries, assuming that they're non-lands. This card has the text that usually leads to problem on cards, which is cast stuff for free. So you can really do some crazy stuff with Etali. Unfortunately, we didn't catch any mana ramp this game, so it's been kind of a slow-moving game. You can get Etali down on turn 2 if you have Mana Crypt and another Mana Rock in your opening hand. It is possible to do that, and the game tends to get out of control really quickly when that happens. Now, there is a chance that we could catch some enchantment removal off of the top of our opponent's decks, which would be pretty sweet. Ah, man, I want to attack the Mimeoplasm opponent, but I don't really want to lose our Etali. I guess I'll just keep going after Riku right now. I'm going to leave the 1 Baleful Strix back on defense. Seems like a good idea. Etali's going to get the trigger. Fortunately, we'll only get to cast 1 spell. What are our choices? We have a Selvala or a Tainted Remedy. Interesting. I like the Selvala right here. Well, we can't use the mana half of the Selvala unless we... Yeah, as far as I know, there's no way to activate the mana half of Selvala. So I'm going to go with the Tainted Remedy instead. And the Tainted Remedy will be really crazy with all the Mathises on board because people will be drawing cards and gaining life like crazy. Unfortunately, that does mean that we won't be able to play anything in our second main phase, but we can drop down this Eye of Ugin, so we'll go ahead and do that. Also, our creatures get a little bit bigger off of the Curse of Stalked Prey, so slowly ticking up. Here's the Sakshima the Imposter coming into play. Copies the Etali. Only we're supposed to have that effect. Another Mathis counter. Let's see where they decide to put it. There are many bounty counters on our Baleful Strix. I wonder if those abilities stack. So, Thada Adele coming into us. We'll throw a Baleful Strix in front of it. There's a lot of good artifacts in this deck, and I really don't want the Riku opponent stealing any of them, so I will gladly make that trade. Opponents will each get to draw a card, but gonna lose life instead of gaining life, so not bad. And we get to draw as well. We draw into a mountain, so all of the lands this game.
In contrast to herbivores, some carnivores were relatively intelligent for their day. T-Rex was considered to be intelligent for a dinosaur and was probably at the upper end of reptile intelligence. Dromaeosaurs, aka raptors, were very intelligent and thought to be just slightly less smart than a cat or dog. And finally, Troodon was the smartest of all the dinosaurs with a very large brain to body weight ratio and was probably as smart as some modern day birds.
Anyway, let's take a look at what our opponents are actually playing, even though we're 8 turns into the game. We have a Mimeoplasm is 2 green, blue, black. As it enters the battlefield, you may exile 2 creature cards from graveyards. If you do, it enters the battlefield as a copy of one of those, and with a number of +1/+1 counters equal to the power of the other card. So you essentially get to combine a big creature and a good ability creature into one big monstrosity. Mimeoplasm decks are usually very strong, and it's one of those commanders that I get a little annoyed with just because it wins a little bit too much. Opponent's going to put another fate counter on a permanent they control. But yeah, the Mimeoplasm will be a graveyard-based deck. Probably going to do some reanimation, some cloning, stuff like that. Just a really powerful commander. Opponent was blowing up the Oblivion Stone, so that's actually really good, because that gets rid of the Curse of Exhaustion on our board, which means we can get back to casting things, which I like. There's a Seething Song. That should help us get back on our feet. And not only that, our other opponents have been missing land drops, so being that we have made all of our land drops and we've drawn a bunch of cards, we're going to be slightly ahead. Orzhov Advocus, nice. That's a fun political card. Forces you to make an interesting choice. Anyway, second opponent, Riku of the Two Reflections, also out of the very first commander set, along with the Mimeoplasm, is 2 blue-red-green for a 2/2. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may pay red-blue. If you do, copy that spell, choose new targets. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield, you may pay blue-green. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature. So, Riku basically says, take any game action, pay 2, and double it. It is a really powerful commander. It tends to be a little bit slow. It's not the quickest commander out there, but once you get into the late game, which is where this game is heading, Riku can do some really powerful stuff. Luckily for us, they have not found red mana, so they're locked on color right now, and haven't been able to do that much. Also, they were under the Curse of Exhaustion for a little bit. So, opponents attacking into us with their Mathis. We're up to 44 off of all the Mathis triggers that happened when the board got wiped. There's an Inferno Titan. Inferno Titan's a sweet card. What to do this turn? I'll start by playing a mountain. I really want to get the Scourge of Courageous down because it's a card I like. Inferno Titan is probably the smarter play, but we're going to go for the Scourge of Courageous. We'll use our Seething Song to do it, so cast the Seething Song. Cast the Scourge of Courageous. Unfortunately, we don't have the mana to activate it because of this Ayavugan. I laid that Ayavugan down on that turn just because there's red and blue players at the table. Some of them may be running Wheel of Fortune, I'm not sure, so I didn't want to chance losing the Ayavugan to a Wheel of Fortune. So anyway, we get Scourge of Courageous down, and once we untap, we can control the board really well, since we can do a lot of damage to creatures with flying or without flying. Getting back to our opponent, finally our last opponent is Mathis Fiendseeker, is red, white, black for a 3/3 that has Menace. At the beginning of your end step, put a bounty counter on target creature an opponent controls. For as long as that creature has a bounty counter on it, it has, when this creature dies, each opponent draws a card and gains 2 life. So, interesting commander. Most people have been playing Mathis with the curse build, where they just throw all of the curses into one deck and just kind of go crazy with it, and strangely Mathis scoops it up. I said he has to go. Well, so Mathis no longer a part of the game. That's awkward. I was in the middle of my explanation. But life goes on. Panharmonicon coming down for the Mimeoplasm opponent. Panharmonicon can do some crazy stuff in Commander. And no exception with the Mimeoplasm. There's probably many, many ETB creatures in that deck, so need to be careful of that. However, after that board wipe, we are in a pretty good place with the Scourge of Courageous out, and we're going to try to reinforce our position here in a second. Mirror works. Whenever another non-token artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2, create a token that's a copy of it. That's a fun card. Mirrored and Besieged. Another land for us. Meh, could have did without more lands. I think right here we just recast our commander. Our commander is the craziest thing that we can do. I feel like we're in a place where we're not going to see that much removal. Mathis was probably holding up most of the removal at the table. Mimeoplasm probably runs a little bit, but probably not crazy amounts. Riku, you never really know with a Riku deck. Riku could have some removal in their deck, but I think that deck is looking to do something else other than play removal spells. So right now I feel good that our creatures will actually survive for a couple turns. And with this Etali down, we have the World at War under our Spine Rock Null. So if we can cast that and start getting multiple combat steps, we should be able to wrap this game up really quickly. This turn I'm going to attack the Mimeoplasm opponent because Mimeoplasm is the one that scares me most. Also, Riku's still locked on red mana, so they probably can't go too crazy missing a color. But Mimeoplasm is one of those decks that wins just a little bit too much. Sculpting Steel for our opponent. Another Panharmonicon, oh boy. Things can get out of control now. Any ETB creature is going to trigger 3 times. Opponent passes turn. They do leave up possible counterspell mana. That's kind of annoying, but see what we can do. Panharmonic on for the Riku opponent. Yep, they're going to get to copy it with the Mirror Works. So yeah, we need to kill our opponents quickly because any ETB creature is going to generate tons and tons of value for them. Back to our turn, we draw yet another land. We were lucky that we got to draw a lot of cards from our opponents with the Mathuses in play, because otherwise we would be so mana flooded this game. So play the land. I'm going to send both guys with the Mimeoplasm. See if the Mimeoplasm does anything with their mana. I'm a little bit nervous about the about a counterspell. Go in for the attacks. We get an Etali trigger. Gamble and Fervor. Ooh, those are good cards. Yeah. Cast Fervor, cast Gamble. I'm gonna go for the Gauntlet of Might because we need a lot more mana. We have a lot of expensive plays that we can make, and right now we're just kind of locked by the amount of mana that we have. We ended up discarding the Steel Hellkite to the Gamble. Kind of wanted the Steel Hellkite, but we do have Buried Ruin in our deck. Also, there's some Eldrazi that can cycle it back into our library. So, Mimeoplasm down to 23. First, I'm going to nibble with this Gauntlet of Might to see if they counter it, because if they have a counter, they probably should counter it. So, nope, that gets through. All right, let's try the Spine Rock Null. Here comes World at War. World at War resolves. Oh boy. So now, we play this Inferno Titan, and we'll shoot the Mimeoplasm opponent. Mimeoplasm goes down to 20. We leave one red floating, not much we can do with it. But that's all right with me. So untap all creatures that attack this turn, our dragon and our dinosaur, and we will go back into the Mimeoplasm opponent, see if we can finish them off right here. They'll need some removal to stay alive. That being the case, we will use the Inferno Titan to shoot the Riku opponent. There's a Clever Impersonator and a Mana Crypt, so cast the Mana Crypt, cast the Clever Impersonator. We will copy the Inferno Titan, shoot the Riku opponent again. Boom, and the Mimeoplasm goes down. No removal. We can pass the turn here. Riku's in a tough spot. They don't have mana for Cyclonic Rift yet. Devastation Tide could be a thing. There's a Gilded Lotus, but I feel really good about our position. Especially with this Fervor down, being able to just haste our creatures down is going to be really, really strong. Especially if it gets to the point where we need the Eldrazi to come in. So opponent's going to make many copies of Gilded Lotus with the Panharmonicons and Mirror Works. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Cool little combo they got going on there. They do have red mana now if they need it. There's a Thought Vessel. Thought Vessel doesn't scare me. Oh, so that World at War, because we casted off the Hideaway ability, it's not going to rebound because for rebound to work, you must cast it from your hand in order to do that, and we did not cast World at War from our hand. But that shouldn't be too big of a deal. One, I think we already have lethal on board with the Inferno Titans, and two, we have Aggravated Assault in case we need a backup plan. And then our third backup plan is a Zayvugan, go find an Eldrazi and haste down the Eldrazi. But yeah, our opponent just had a really crazy turn copying a bunch of artifacts. With the Mirror Works and the Panharmonicon, that's a pretty sweet combo. I think I need to try that out at some point. They have 4 copies of Gilded Lotus, 4 copies of Thought Vessel. So opponent hasn't done anything for a while. I wonder if they're just leaving us to hang, or if they're in the think tank. Looks like we have to wait for opponent to time out again. Super annoying. Yep, so opponent timed out. You guys saw we got to do some kind of crazy stuff with Etali. It was a bit of a slower game. We didn't have any mana rocks, and neither did our opponents, so it actually played out as a somewhat fair game of Magic. But yeah, Etali's interesting. If you get Etali down early, sometimes it's just unstoppable, but sometimes it gets blown up, and a lot of times it'll struggle to recover. Honestly, I think it's a cool commander and it's interesting, but I think if you're looking to cheat big things into play easily, Neheb is probably a little bit easier to use because of the random factor, and you get to play stuff out of your opponent's deck. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. As always, feel free to comment, like, or subscribe. Thank you for watching.